Hey everyone! Today I'm excited to share with you a new Dory deck list. One that actually got 22nd at the Calling Vegas by not me, but with Easton Douglas, who is here with us today to explain his choices and how the deck pretty much performed at the Calling. Hi Easton, thanks for joining us today.
Hi.
All right.
Happy to be here.
Yes, I'm really glad that you could join me. Because when I looked at your list, it was like, oh, this looks standard, but there's some pretty interesting choices you made. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to go into it. But first off, I think not many people might know about you. So for those that may not be familiar with you, can you go over who you are, what lab experience you have, team, and what hero you used to play? Because you just recently picked up Dory. Dory isn't like your main that you used to play. So I want to hear a little bit about your experience.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Easton Douglas. I started playing the game right before, I was watching Tales of Aria preview season and getting very excited about the ice heroes, which kind of answers your follow-up question about the heroes I've liked in the past. I'm definitely an ice hero kind of guy. I like control strategies, and I like kind of tempo-y aggro control. So those in my mind would be sort of like Oldhim, and then kind of some old style Lexi lists. I was actually kind of, I think, the first person to popularize like 9 Winter's Bites Lexi.
Oh, okay. Just freeze people out and then like
yeah,
cards from them. I see.
So it wasn't really Ice Lexi. It's just you run a lot of the cards that you'll see in the Fuseless lists of today. But obviously, this was at PT2 is when I played this to pretty good success, and so that was like, I think I had like 14 ice cards or 15 ice cards, but yeah, like 9 Winter's Bites, just sort of like control the game until they're dead. But yeah, I definitely like control decks a lot. Oldhim was my main one. My biggest success was top 8ing US Nationals last year with Oldhim. So definitely those are kind of my kind of playstyle preferences.
I see. So yeah, kind of sad that Oldhim kind of like LL'd and it's gone. But then, first thought is why Dory? Because you have another Guardian, Bravo, who you could still play, right? So why did you gravitate towards Dory instead of Bravo?
Yeah, so Bravo does not appeal to me. All of the aspects of Oldhim that I liked are aspects that are dissimilar from Bravo's playstyle. The overlap between those two heroes are the aspects that I could take or leave from Oldhim. So yeah, Bravo doesn't interest me. I either like a lot of micro decisions or like really big picture strategy, and Bravo kind of has neither of those things. Bravo needs to sort of like, in some matchups, he definitely does have a lot of big picture. Guardians do in general, but he has more of set up a 1-2 punch at a key junction on the turn of the game, and then hope that 2 punch doesn't coincide with drawing all reds or all blues. That's basically how I see Bravo. Is you find that junction in the game, you buy yourself a turn with the with your life total, you go for your big play and you arsenal another follow-up play, and you hope that your draw step on the next turn is good enough.
Right. That's why I think like those pitch stack people talk about the second cycle with Bravo, so hopefully you have everything all streamlined at that point. You pretty much play out all your big attacks at that point.
Yeah, in some matchups you're allowed to do that. Some matchups it's a little bit more difficult. Sometimes you can play that way, but you're actually just better off trying to have a more assertive game 1 cycle. Like your win rate's going to be a little stronger if you just try to play the odds like a kind of outline rather than trying to go for second cycle. Yeah. Just because some heroes can counter pitch stack, or they can, if you give them enough space in first cycle, they can just sort of overwhelm you. So
makes sense.
Anyways, so Dory, I've always been really impressed by Dory. I think that the kind of common thought that people talk about how, the better the player, the worse Dory is, if they know how to play around stuff. I think that's a little overblown, to be honest. I think there are some card choices you can run in Dory where that does become more of a problem. Of course, skill always matters a lot.
Right.
But I think it is a little overblown. I think she has the raw power level to compete. And I always thought she was a little underrated. Not really, actually, because I'm not a madman like you and running her into an Oldhim format. That was always, Oldhim was always a strong enough deterrent for me to just never really pick her up. But I knew from probably 6 months before Oldhim LL, that I wanted to pick her up and learn her because I thought that she would be underrated in this new format because people maybe didn't correctly assess that a lot of the thing that was holding her back was that matchup in particular.
Yeah, with
So
him gone now, I think, a lot of people expected her to like get picked up, and I think she is starting to like kind of get some momentum here and there, but a lot of people are, I think, still undervaluing what she could do. And right now, maybe she's getting some easy pickings from, people that aren't experienced fighting Dory, but she could still surprise even the most experienced people for sure.
yeah, she's quite adaptable in the way that you approach each matchup and in the list you present. And, definitely disclosure, I've worked with a lot of different lists, and this is the list I came to for this weekend. It's very much a meta call. And it also is about like, what kind of strategy do I think is going to be effective this weekend? What do people think about Dory? What do people think about what the axe has done to her? A card I'm not running, but like, what are people's presuppositions going into this weekend, and how can I kind of exploit that in the way that I pilot this deck and this list? So definitely very adaptable, and a lot of different choices you can kind of go into. So this list is very much a point in time list, but it does maybe highlight some cool things you can do with the hero that hasn't previously been done.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, then let's just dive into your deck then.
Yeah.
So gonna start off with the main deck equipment you have. You get your bracers, crown, downblade is weapon of choice, like you said, and the tunic and bolters, very standard. So that looks all good. And then we have your nourishing, out for blood, and we're gonna stop here real quick. You have 2 plow-throughs. Now, this is a very interesting card. I do like it a lot, but I never made room for it. But it looks like you opted to add this in. Can you give me why you decided to add this card in?
Yeah, I think I was expecting a decent number of Lexis, of Bravos, Ninjas. These are all matchups that I think can be pretty close, and it's kind of up to me to tech for them. I think this card shines in all of those matchups, particularly against Bravo. I think it is quite a strong card. So yeah, I couldn't quite fit the 3rd copy in, but I knew I wanted to run a couple copies. I only got to play against 1 Bravo, which I was able to defeat, and I don't think this mattered much, but it does come up in a lot of those games against that hero in particular. Yeah, and I've been quite impressed with it, just making better breakpoints against some of these aggro decks that block a little bit worse as well.
Yeah, true, because if they just like 2 card block 6, this will get like a +1. So it's like for the whole turn. So if you have like a glint or run through after that, then you have the +1 that carry over to the next downblade. So it could be pretty scary.
Yep, exactly. This was also the card that most players had to read.
Because no one
they asked
really
me lots
sees
of questions about, yeah. So
Right.
does the pump work for the next one? Does it persist? So on and so forth. So yeah, but definitely a powerful card that I think Dory should be looking for certain meta games.
Yeah, especially with this, like you said, current meta with all these attack action heavy lists. I think this card, I think a lot of people should look into again.
Yeah. It's not very good. I have to run it into Kano and Icelander, and it's not very good there. It's just a 1-for-3.
Yep.
But that's just sort of like a small sacrifice. It's still a 1-for-3 with no other text, and against Bullander it could do something. So yeah, not great there, but I felt like I wasn't going to see Kanos, and I feel really strong in the Icelander matchup. So.
Oh, okay. We could talk about the Icelander matchup later, but that's good to know. Because you also have a Sharpened Steel, which I think is a good card, but some front pumps aren't always great against like Icelander because they can always like react to you before you even get your Dawnblade swing out. But has this Sharpened Steel been pretty impactful and you always like it in your list?
Yeah, I think for most turn cycles, you're going to have to fight through that Frostbite regardless. And honestly, I think one of the best ways of fighting through it is to have low to the ground, no pitch cards like Sharpened Steel. I've actually seen this as a huge overperformer in that matchup, and actually just in general. I think it's quite strong. It lets you go, that, and then maybe a 1-cost go again, and then it allows you maybe with a tunic resource to still be able to like swing through a frostbite, or maybe you're just going for like that into a pitch of blue with the Dawnblade to attack, and then you have maybe 1 or 2 pitch floating to prevent some arcane. But yeah, anything that just like has a 0 in the top right hand corner, I think is can be pretty decent against Icelander. So
I see. Just a fishing card, right? Like no reprise needed. It's just like pump. Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah,
Sharpened Steel is always a good card. I have a hard time because mine's more reaction heavy, but it makes sense that you have some of these cards here to just front pump and be able to force those like overblocks or just like more defense reactions early too.
I also, though, it's probably worth saying at this point that I play a lot more kind of mid-rangey, and for a lot smaller hands.
Hmm.
1, 2, 3 card hands. I'm looking for more than 2, 3, 4, 5, which I think a lot of Dories would play differently. It's just kind of like a play style thing.
Hmm.
But I'm very into this plus tunic resource for a 1 card 6. That's very very strong.
Okay,
It comes
yeah.
up a lot in a lot of these kind of grindy matchups. You can just get a huge swing for basically, you could block very heavily and still come back for a lot. Can kind of buy you a little bit tempo in that matchup. So I'm a big fan of that line of play as well. I also just with some of these front pumps, they're just very reliable, and that one's very efficient to kind of go alongside Iron Song Determination, which I'm on 3 of as well. So
Okay, yeah. Makes sense. And then let's see, you also have, spoils, standard, supremacy, always good. And then you actually have a rainbow of Warrior's Valor, right? I know it's a good card, but you kind of value this conditional go again from the Warrior's Valor quite a bit.
yeah, I think my game plan into a lot of these matchups against aggro decks is to buy myself 2 card hands,
Hmm.
oftentimes arsenaling one of these and then buying a blue on the following turn, and yeah, it demands 2 cards. As soon as they give me 2 cards, then I can sort of buy my next hand for a lot cheaper in terms of my life total, and it requires nothing else to sort of take those 2 cards, right? So like,
Hmm.
I'm sure we'll talk about the fact that I don't run glistening in my deck, and so you could sort of see these yellow warriors valor. Sometimes people run 1 or 2, like a sampling of yellow valor in
Hmm.
addition to glistening. I'm running the full 3, and I'm running full 3 blue driving blades to
Yeah.
kind of fulfill all my go again requirements. And the idea is that, well, driving blades of blue, I don't need a lot to justify it. And then the yellow warrior's valor, again, it just has that pump. I would call glistening a more conditional card, right?
Hmm.
Even though it gives unconditional go again, the fact that you sort of need to be able to hit and combine it with like an attack reaction, and also combine it with sort of catching them without a D react, or have multiple attack reacts. Like, there's a lot of ifs. Whereas this card, you just need a blue in it, and you either get to attack twice, or you demand 2 cards. So
Yeah, makes sense. I actually like Yellow Warrior's Valor a lot because it actually, comes in for 5 with your swing. So like a single sink below from Arsenal can't cover it like a Blue Warrior's Valor would
yeah,
be covered. So it actually forces a card from hand most of the time. So yeah, makes sense. I'm personally on 2, but 3 totally makes sense. And then you have your Determination. I know most lists right now use 1 or 2, but have you found 3 to be very kind of like key to your playstyle of this deck?
yeah. Great in finishing games out. Great to be able to like play them alongside your supremacies. Yeah, honestly, a lot of matchups. The way I win is just by arsenaling this or supremacy, and then just kind of
Mm.
stapling those cards together. You arsenal one, you wait till you draw the other. Ideally, you have like a blue and a pump in that point,
Hmm.
and then the kind of math that you're able to get over that turn cycle is well worth buying with your life total, and you can kind of levy that into a counter, and then maybe a force block on the next turn, or maybe just another big turn. So yeah, I'm very very big on this card. It's a card when I was early on testing Dory, it was either terrible because I was terrible, or it was great because I was playing with it really well.
I see.
It's a little bit of a skill check. You got to combine it with the right things, but if you do, I think it's well worth the squeeze.
Yeah, it's always scary. It's +1 for the whole turn, So if
Yep,
you're able to get it, like you said, with the Supremacy tied in, like 6 dominated, draw a card each time, like, oh, so scary, right?
yep, yep.
Let's see. Then you have 1 copy of Run Through. Is that just for another go again source, or?
Yeah, it's really good. In a world of warmonger's diplomacy, I
Hmm.
tried having a bunch of copies of this to kind of better contest that card, except it just didn't really quite feel right. It's nice to have access to one. It just, if you have a bunch, it's something that they're more inclined to play around. One, it usually gets them pretty good. People are hard pressed to block a Dawn Blade when all you do is pitch a blue to attack with it with no go again, and that's a pretty big blowout when they do no block.
I see. Yeah, makes sense because all the time it's just glint, right? When they just no block. But if you have just like the Run Through, one sneaky one, they're like, oh, I didn't expect that Run Through. So.
Yep, exactly. So if you haven't seen it, it's been a long game. They're unlikely to play around it, and so
Hmm.
when you do draw it, you can kind of make that play more confidently, I think.
Yep. Okay, then you have your singings, and then yeah, you only have one tuning blade, just like my favorite card, but you only have one here. So
Yeah.
I'm guessing it sort of has a tie with how you only have like no glistenings as well, because this with glistening is like backbreaking for a lot of people, but you're not running glistening, so is that why you only have like one tuning blade, just like a finisher card? If they ever like overblock something, or
Yeah, exactly. So it's when you decide you don't want glistening, which a lot of people will see this and disagree. I mean, most people run that card. Everyone does basically. But if you decide you don't want glistening, then this card's stock does go down a little bit.
Mhm.
It's still. I mean, you need the first copy. You need that toolbox effect for your singings.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a resource card, so it's pretty easy to pitch when you draw it, like the first one. So it's not like you're not usually priced into blocking with it, like you are sometimes blocked into pricing with redundant reds. You can usually get rid of this when you need to, so you can always kind of preserve it in your deck to save it for a rainy day. So I found I really only needed one copy. A lot of it also comes down to kind of buying. Smaller hands rather than buying bigger hands. Having access to effects like this can really help you kind of swing 3 times, things like that. I'm not finding myself into situations where I can really go for those big blowout plays as much because of my own play style. The last thing I'll say about this is I commented about how kind of overblown people playing people who are strong players playing around Dory makes Dory worse. I think that is kind of more true with this card. I think strongest players are not going to get too got by this. They
Mhm.
might have to get a little got, but the stronger the player, I think the less potent this card does get.
True, because sometimes they'll be able to like perfectly block and have the D-React ready, so tuning isn't able to go over and such, so they could play around it a bit.
Yep.
And also, if you have one copy of it, if they ever see you play it, they might expect 2 more copies, so they always have to like keep that in mind too. So,
You also get a lot of value from this card just by people being afraid of it, you know.
Right.
So
it's like the one thing people like check the graveyard for, like, did they play all their tunings out yet? So
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then we talked about your driving blade. I think not many people use this card, but you like it just for the go again. I guess it kind of force blocks too, right? It just comes in for the breakpoint of 4. So
Yeah, and I run Tunic in most matchups, so even
Mhm.
though the pitch requirement is pretty steep, with a Tunic resource, you can still threaten the second attack with a 2-card hand.
Makes sense. And then you have your glints, and then hit and runs, and then you have your blue Iron Song response and overpower, precision press, and then looks like just 2 blue shunts.
Yeah, and actually I was on 0 for a while, but I ended up coming back around to them. Yeah,
Okay.
it's decent.
Yeah.
I expected a little bit more Briar. I got pretty blown out by having, because you'll also see I have some hold lines in my sideboard, and I
Mhm.
like sideboarding very heavy into that matchup because Chonky Briar does exist, and in fact won nationals.
Yep.
And so first of all, you want to run a very large deck, so you want to be able to run maybe upwards of almost 70 cards. You want to up your blue count so that you're not just drawing too many red hands. So I want all my blues.
Mhm.
But then when you do that, and I feel like I can reasonably fatigue most normal briars. I've never lost against like a normal briar before,
Mhm.
and all this to say, CNC can be quite a blowout. So you just gotta be a little careful not having too many D reacts. Otherwise, they send a CNC for 12, and suddenly like your whole game plan crumbles
Right.
to
It's
pieces.
like, oh
So
man, I can't even block this out, or like
yeah,
I have to take
exactly.
the whole thing because it's mostly like 3 cards of D reacts and lose
Yeah,
my
yeah,
arsenal or something. Yeah.
yep.
So
So
that's interesting that you're
yeah.
able to like pretty much fatigue out a regular Briar too. Like I never approached a matchup that way, but
Well, yeah, and it's very much it's in the early to mid game, it's very much sort of aggro fatigue, right? Like you
Mhm.
want to be protecting your life total a lot while trying to get them to block with their threats. And that's actually how I engage the Lexi matchup too, where I side encourage and I'm doing a lot of like equipment blocking early, and I'm making it seem like I'm really well. The jig is up now. I'm doing this, deck tech, but I'm making it seem like I'm trying to like basically
Aggro them. Yeah.
aggro them back, and then at some point, once I've gotten to like block with enough threats that I feel like I can turn the corner, I just hard pivot and I just fatigue them.
Oh, it's very interesting. Wow, that
Yeah,
mind
yeah,
games, different type of mind games there.
Yeah, and that's to answer an earlier question. That's why I love Dory. I feel like she's so flexible. She has, all the way from 0 card hands with, Tunic Swing for 3 to amazing 5 card hands. So she's so flexible. She can really respond to how your opponent's playing, and I really like that. So.
All right. Well, then let's go over your sideboard now. So you got your Command and Conquers, pretty good as always, and you have that, and then Fate Foreseen, something I don't really see. I see Sinks, but Fate Foreseen is something really I really see in Dory. But I guess this goes towards like how you want to approach like your deck, correct? Like just want to be able to be efficient at blocking and stopping those breakpoints. So is that why you have, Sinks and Fates in here?
Yeah. So Bravo, Lexi, Ninjas. I feel like all of these decks. If you had infinite slots, I would imagine most players would choose to run Fate Foreseen in those matchups, right? So it's just a matter of, do you have the space to fit those? And I ultimately decided that those matchups were prominent enough that, and close enough also, they're all pretty close matchups, that it was worth it to run these cards. Lends itself to my more defensive kind of strategy. I have a really clean sideboard of leaving the Shun, Sinks, Fates, and CNCs in my sideboard against the Wizards. That leaves me with a clean 60, and the only bad card is basically those red plow-throughs, but even then, 1 for 3. So the sideboard's kind of very clean for those Wizard matchups, I definitely find that those tools are really helpful. I mean, particularly against Lexi, Fate Foreseen is just so strong.
I see. Makes sense. And then, if you're like playing into Lexi, if they come with those breakdowns, if they see a Fate Foreseen, but you still have a curse, they're like, what's going on? So
yeah, exactly.
And then let's see, have just 2 Iron Song responses, not 3. So you just found 2, just like, kind of good enough when they kind of trigger the reprise. Don't need the full 3.
Yeah. It's just kind of a little give and take for different matchups with the sideboard space. There are matchups where I'd want 3, but there are a lot of matchups where I think 2's enough. There are also a lot of matchups where I don't run any because I don't think that they're going to be blocking me enough to make it not a liability at certain points. Yeah.
And then
I actually even sideboard out some glistenings at some point. Wait, is that singing? Sorry,
yeah.
All these cards have sort of like different iterations of the same kind of concept. I even side a little lower on some singings in certain matchups where I don't expect they're going to be doing a lot of blocking, especially after they see the fades, see that I'm doing more blocking. They're going to be more focused on trying to maximize their damage output than preventing mine.
Oh, makes sense. Yeah, for me, I kept it as always like a 3 of, but it makes sense if you feel like your game plan is to just be kind of efficient, and then also if most of the time they're not gonna be blocking out, then it's not gonna trigger that much. Then yeah.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And then you have this one lone yellow overpower.
Yeah. It's my route replacement.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. This is like your one finisher card, get over the tall blocks card.
Yeah. I just found in first and sometimes even second cycle, mostly first cycle, route is just not very strong. It's not a very good card on rate. It usually requires a double pitch turn, and oftentimes maybe that final pitch you're just using to activate your arm. So like the 1 extra pitch for overpower, it's not really much worse. Sometimes if they are blocking, you kind of have to do the route early, and then all you're really doing is returning the card that they're then going to block with for the next one.
Right.
So I just found it kind of weak there, which means you kind of gotta like pitch it for a finisher later. Pitching a red is just so awkward. It's really not great. But pitching a yellow is really quite fine for Dory. She either wants to pitch like a blue and a yellow in a turn, or she can have like a kind of like a smaller turn and just pitch 1 yellow, maybe use a Tunic resource or something. I just found it a lot easier to keep this in my deck, and ultimately a pretty comparable finisher in comparison to route.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, route is always like kind of like feels bad, like, oh, I could use it to like just get a hit to swing again, but they're just gonna block out with that 1 card I sent back anyway. So you really have to save for the end where you have like counters because they don't have any more G reacts, or you have like an on hit with like glistening that you don't have in this deck, right? So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, another reason why maybe I was under impressed by that card. But
and then you talked a little bit about Hold the Line, but yeah, why Hold the Line? Has this card just been pretty useful for you?
Yeah, man, I'm pretty obsessed with just having sideboard blues. I can't remember the last deck where I didn't have sideboard blues. And because of that, I tend to build decks that have just really strong matchups into Icelander, because really what that deck is doing is it's preying on your blue count
Mhm.
more than anything else. But yeah, so I knew I wanted to have a couple extra blues to bring in for against wizards and stuff, and also to bring in when I'm running a pile of cards, right? When you run 72 cards, you can't just run the same blue count as you do in your main deck, otherwise you're gonna have a lot of pitch problems.
Right.
Once I decide that's what I want, well, what's the highest impact blue I can run? And for me, with Lexi around, with ninjas running Art of War, with even brutes. I think Reiner's a pretty tough matchup. I don't expect to
Mhm.
see it, but if I do, and Levia is reasonably popular. It's
Right.
a solid tier 2 deck. All these decks turn on Hold the Line, and it's just so strong when it works. When it lines up organically, it's great. Or you just sort of like shave usually the shunts in favor of the Hold the Line in matchups where you're running a lean deck, but you want access to this tool. If you draw it early, you can arsenal it and kind of, depending on how many of those effects that they've played, the Blood Rush Bellows, the Art of Wars, the three of a kinds, you can decide if they've, a few turns have passed, so they haven't played any. Well, they're probably going to draw it soon, so it's worth arsenaling and holding it for a couple turns. Such a huge payoff. Yeah, I mean, just a blue that prevents 5 damage is huge.
Yeah. I thought it was just like 5 damage block on that one attack, but the 3 damage prevention kind of floats, so that's very nice.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, it does kind of float broken up too. So if I'm blocking a 4 power thing with this, I'll still have 1 prevention floating to help me cover up a future breakpoint, which is
Mhm.
huge.
Yep. Okay. Maybe I have to try that out too. And then you have your courage. I guess this comes in for. Do you ever like make an aggro like list with this deck, or are you mostly just playing like mid-rangey, more on the mid-rangey side of like having the courage for the option of the block or popping it off to maybe have a big churn with like your supremacy and Iron Song determination?
Yeah, so I'd say I kind of have to go aggro into Kano and Rhinar. I think those are, again, not super popular decks, but pretty tough matchups and really force me to go aggro. Courage doesn't apply necessarily against Kano, but to answer the question of when I do go aggro, that's when. I mostly side this in against ninjas and then rangers. It's unclear to me whether or not I want it against Azalea. Tunic's also pretty good because I have shunts and stuff.
All right.
Anyway, so yeah, mostly it's for those. It's actually a card that I cut completely from my list for a while. I know. A lot of people.
Yeah, like what? Courage is so good.
What I'm saying is sacrilege. People, there's no glistening, there's no route, there's no iron song, there's no. Or I'm dogging on courage. Ultimately, the way I play Dory, I think she's a really, really strong Tunic deck. So if the matchup's going long enough, / I don't need that extra equipment block. I really prefer Tunic. In sort of like the last week or so, as I'm playing against stronger and stronger pilots on some of these decks I want to kind of test against, I found courage to be kind of a necessary tool to kind of come back around to and have, even if it's just for a few matchups. So.
And then those are just for like when you play those higher skilled pilots, you found that the courage just being able to block was that the main thing that you like needed from it, or was the actual ability that you used?
Yeah, it felt like I do a lot of fatiguing with this deck, but I do a lot of it not in traditional fatiguing ways, but by forcing them to block with threats. And so I
actively fatiguing them with damage and like threats.
Exactly. Yeah. I try to utilize those all of those spoils and valors to really pair with a blue to just. You'd ask them a pretty important question, like, you want to like give me a counter or let me hit and then
swing again,
and then still have to block the second one, or are you going to block it out? And then once you block it out, I try to cast all 3 red valors every game. I try to never block with those because those demand 2-3 blocks, and the 3 blocks are the threats, right? So if I can get any aggro player to block with 2 of their CNCs, E-strikes, or other attack actions, that's huge. That's 2 less threats that I have to worry about blocking out. And then eventually I sort of count down their power cards, and some games go that way, and some games I pivot and I fatigue. Some games I'm like, well, I'm drawing the Dory hands, and so I'm just able to kind of like trade with them and beat them that way. And some games people play hand to hand, and I'm just able to sit back and fatigue the whole time.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I guess looping back around, it's less so about anything other than, I was feeling really strong into ninjas and rangers, and then I play against stronger and stronger opponents, and also ones that are getting used to playing against me. And I just saw the value of being able to choose a couple more spots where I could just block for high equipment value. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, I don't know if that's a good answer, but
No,
there it
that's
is.
great, because also how you play, I think, is quite different from how I play, because I guess mine's a bit more reaction heavy, so I like to do a lot of bluffing. But it sounds like yours is a little bit more heads up, where you're like, I'm gonna present, 6 conditional Gogan. If you don't block this, I'm gonna swing again and get a counter. So you better give me some of those good power cards, or else I'm gonna, be starting racking
Yeah.
up damage. So
Yeah, it's different blocking because I'm holding a card, but what I'm bluffing is the attack react. When in reality I'm just holding a fate for seeing that I'm looking to arsenal this turn.
Right.
So
So
if you
there's that
overblock,
bluffing, but
amazing. Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
it's like, all right, like forcing a question to them. So like, do I have the react? I don't know. Like, what are you gonna do? So,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
And then you have just 2 no runes, the gloves and hood. This is, I'm guess, just for Icelander and Kano. Do you also run this into like the rune blades or anything?
Yep. Yeah, I run hood into the rune blades, all 3 of them, and then I run obviously both into wizards. Yeah, I mean, I think tunic and the boots are both extremely strong tools in those matchups. So two's all you really need.
Okay. And then I see like no Oasis. Like Oasis for me against like Wizards hasn't been very important, because I like to be, I guess, more aggressive into those matchups. But for you, you just pretty much mitigate some damage and just kind of like you said, just threaten like a Valor turn. Is that your game plan into them?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be straight up. I think this list is quite bad into Kano. I was able to beat one Kano of the weekend, which was a crazy match that involved a long judge call, and I won't get into it here. But anyway, I did win that one. But I think that matchup's quite bad for me. I think if I added Oasis, it would be a lot better. But that's basically the only matchup. Maybe Azalea. I also want the Oasis. I think every other matchup I don't want it, so it's really just for those 2 decks which are not super prominent. I was basically throwing my Kano matchup, and I've actually found Oasis to be pretty under. It's an underperformer into Icelander. I just sort of grit and bear those ice veins. They usually have to take a bunch of damage to be able to buy them, so I just try to prevent as much as I can, get through that turn cycle, buy tempo at a later junction, and kind of get my foot back on the gas pedal as soon as I can. But that matchup's just, I think, about protecting your life total as much as humanly possible, while presenting as much damage as much damage as humanly possible. So you're trying to do both things at once. You're trying to thread that needle, and if you successfully do that, I think you can kind of outmath them.
Interesting. So with that, then let's kind of dive into like what your game plan is with this deck for like the top meta heroes. Starting with, I guess, since you're talking about Icelander, like what do you do with this deck? You just keep this 55, put your 2 no rune equipment, and then I guess the blue hold the line. Is there? I guess you need 3 more cards. What else do you add in the Icelander?
Yeah. So Fate Sinks, Shunts, and CNCs are out. Everything else is in. That's a 60 right there.
Yep.
And yeah, I have a higher blue count than I think most stories. I have 25 total, a decent number of yellows. Yeah, Nourishing is amazing. I think Sharpened Steel is amazing. Determination's quite strong. Supremacy is good because they're low on D-reacts. and mostly I just feel so confident playing into that matchup for most decks, just because I think people don't realize how much of a gift it is to take damage when you can otherwise prevent damage against Icelander. They can't hold tempo, so if you just sort of like protect your life for a couple turn cycles, even if you're not doing very much, eventually they're going to give you tempo back. They can't hold it for forever unless they just completely nut draw you. And so you just protect your life total as much as you can, while again simultaneously threading the needle of presenting as much as possible. Don't get blown out by Channel Lake Frigid. Make sure you always have a game plan for that. Play your arsenal card first so that you don't get blown out by what's the thing that freezes your arsenal.
Full snap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Lots of little things that just makes that matchup feel quite good.
I see. And then I guess if for like a Bullander, do you actively like block out with like cards from hand and also and just come like all right, I'm just gonna like swing back for like 3 or like come in with a sharpened steel and swing for 6? Is that how you do it?
Yep. I do think Bullander's better against us. It makes the matchup closer. Hopefully, you're able to sort of force some of those physical threats as blocks instead of attacking you. But I do try to protect my life as much as possible for them. I'm willing to take 4 or whatever if I need to. But I'm hard pressed to not just put 2 cards in front of any of like the Bullander type effects and 1 card in front of Scar.
I see. Makes sense. Okay, and then I guess the big dog, Lexi. What do you do against Lexi?
Yep, so as I was mentioning, my game plan, you can enact a lot of different strategies against Lexi. I think the matchup's very fun and very close. My game plan this weekend was, capitalizing on the fact that people don't know what I'm trying to do, and I try to make it seem like I'm doing one strategy and then kind of pivot to another. And then kind of secondary to that, I do sort of let them set the tone. If they are playing hand-to-hand, I will play more defensively. If they are trying to set up bigger turns, I will try to push more damage. So kind of let them set the tone, and I respond in kind.
Okay. Sounds good. And then Bravo, do you just run like the whole pile into them?
Yep. Even nourishing, which is a fun 25% to draw before your CNCs. It's always fun when that happens.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just like a block card usually.
Yeah. Or just like a 1 card for 6 too is kind of nice.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
If you have tempo and you draw it, you can go like sword into that or something. But yeah, I think it's a close matchup. I think that having all these D-reacts helps a lot.
For sure.
And I think that a lot of that comes down to how you play it. I think that's the main matchups where the determinations are the best, because they either eat the equipment and D-reacts early, or they're a finisher after they run out of that stuff. So I think it's quite good there.
One thing I forgot to ask was that your list also doesn't have like Versus, even though you like to play a very mid-rangey deck. Why is that? Because I found Versus to be actually much better in like those kind of matchups than Braveforge.
Yeah, so I didn't like a few things. I didn't like that it was temper. I don't like that it breaks after you block with it a second time. I like having that available in the late game. Decks like Bravo, for example, they might force you to block with it earlier than you want to, just because otherwise you're getting crushed. So I like the fact that this tool, I still have access to it till the bitter end. I like that when I am when I do have unknown cards and extra resources, that I have to invest 1 less resource into this up front on the first Domblade attack, and still be able to get that break point for the second one. And I like pitching reds when I'm doing like small turns or just attacking with 1 card. You can either save a yellow/blue for activating Versus and swing for 3 to kind of force that block so that you don't get the courage. But I found myself in most cases basically preferring to just hold that red in my hand and preserving the power card rather than forcing the 3 block, which they might just want to do anyway.
Okay. It's good to know. Thanks. And then let's see who else. Oh, one last hero was Dromai. So I see you have like just 4 poppers. Was that most of the time enough? And then what else do you bring into that game plan?
Yeah, I don't even know if poppers are good into Dromai from this deck, because it's Dromai's job to just stack up Ash and then overload you with dragons after they've gotten your life total lower at a key junction. So usually I find myself just like attacking with them. Sometimes it comes up, but I think the best Dromais tend to. That's at least how it happened this weekend. They tend to just stack up Ash and don't play out dragons. If they start playing out dragons early, I feel like it's too much synergy for my deck to get those free on hits. So
free counters for you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a really fascinating matchup. I was able to defeat all of my Dromai opponents this weekend.
Wow.
And the matchup feels good.
What do you bring in from your sideboard? Do you bring your Sync's Fates and stuff to drag out the game to preserve your life, or?
I don't. Yeah, so I bring in the CNCs, and I bring in my aggression, so like the Overpowers and Iron Songs. I end up shaving on, I think 1 or 2 determinations. It's one of the only. I think that's the only matchup I shave on that card. Just because it's a lot of times you just need bigger numbers for when you are clearing dragons and swinging face. So it doesn't help a lot with that. Plus, they have a lot of defensive tools to get around it. But yeah, no, I'm going really aggressive. I am protecting my life total a decent amount early, but so far I just feel like the fact that I can get these on hits against these dragons is just so brutal for them. The games are fascinating. I had one match where it was a very close game, and by the end of it, I had 7 counters on Dawnblade.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Get those counters.
That's the most I've ever had. I had to borrow dice from my opponent next to me, or my the player next to me, and he's like, "You can just keep that. You'll need it again, clearly." But it was so cool to see 7 counters, and also how close that game is, because that's just how it goes. Like once they start playing the dragons out, I'm clearing a dragon and then going face, and then they are blocking as much as they can and saving 1 card and swinging for a bunch, and so I'm getting these counters. They're swinging really wide. It all kind of comes to a breaking point of like, does my life total get to 0 before my counter game plan just overwhelms them? It's a really fun matchup.
Yeah, I think there's always like the key turning point. Like both player needs to realize like I have enough dragons on board. I need to spit out like 2-3 dragons now to like whittle you down, and hopefully as Dory you have enough health that you could take some of that damage and go into a dragon, then back into Dromai to like shave off like that 7 health or something even after they block out, because you already at, like you said, like 5-6 counters. What are they gonna do, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Very interesting matchup. Do you run No Run Hood into that matchup to prevent Azfalai or burn them all, or no?
I do not. I try to protect my life totals at other points where I can protect it more efficiently, because it's basically never efficient to prevent Arcane against them. So yeah, I do not. I just try to make sure that I don't let myself get stuck into an end game state where I'm getting kind of destroyed because I can't prevent it.
Okay, makes sense. Okay. With that, then can you go over I don't know if you're gonna go for round to round about your tourney, but like how do you do, what you face, how to play out your wins, losses, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I ended up ending 9-4 at 22nd place. I was 9-2 at a point. I think I had a win and in against the eventual winner, Yuki, in the 12th round. I lost one of the closest games I've ever played against her, and she played amazingly well to win that, and obviously go on to win the tournament. I ended up losing my next round to my teammate Levi from Team Ascent, and so yeah, kind of a little disappointing ending, but I was having a blast this weekend. I didn't have time to be disappointed. I still had a ton of fun. Deep run, still live till pretty late. My losses were against Levi on Azalea, Yuki on Lexi, Isaac Root on Lexi, and somebody I don't know and don't remember who was on a he was on a Phi. He's on a Phi.
Oh, a Phi. I see.
Yeah, I did lose to a Phi. I think, I've never played a tournament where by the end of it, I don't feel like I couldn't have top 8'd if I had just played a little better. I think that against all of those first 3 opponents, I think I could have won if I had played a little bit better, and the reason they won is because they played better than me. And I feel like I think my Phi opponent, who I can't remember their name, I think they played amazingly well. Although that game was the only variance game where I feel like there's basically nothing I could have done. I was going second, and they played a Warmongers on turn 0. which relegated me down to a 3 damage turn, and then they had like a 25 plus damage turn on their next one.
Yeah,
they were just drawing.
that's pretty hard.
They were drawing really hard. I actually almost came back. I think I played really well to almost kind of recover, but yeah, was not enough. But yeah, so
yeah, those turns I'm
those
almost like
losses,
tempted
yeah.
to like just put like, should I just pop bolters here to like just threaten something? Because yeah, just thinking naked downblade, that's it. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, I mean the problem is, what am I threatening? Another 3? Like
Yeah.
it's nothing because I can't even activate my arm piece, because of war.
Right.
So yeah, it was bad.
I see. Well, still that's amazing. 9-2, and then your losses sounds like were to really top players. So
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah, no, I was privileged to play against a lot of really strong players. I had a lot of amazing games. I had a blast. It was kind of like a returning to competitive play for me. I've been out for most of this year, so yeah, I had a great time that weekend. Yeah, I don't know if there are any other matchups you want me to kind of go into, like any heroes you want me to kind of tell you if I played against or whatever. I don't know if we necessarily have the time to go like, round by round or whatever.
No, I guess what was
I
I
think
guess
the
hardest deck I guess you played against during that tournament, other than the ones you lost to, the Lexi and the Icelander. Was there any other ones?
Yeah, there was a Dromai in day 1 where I won the game at 1 life and just only barely. That was the one where I had 7 counters. I just loved that match because it was the me at 1 life and also me with 7 counters, and just the fact that like both those things were true and the game was so close. It really speaks to the beauty of Fab and how each matchup is very unique and fun. So those were the really close ones. I think a lot of the other matchups that I won, I won pretty strong. Like
Nice.
I don't know that I had a ton of other really close ones. I probably have, and I'm just forgetting. And I feel like my losses were also very close. There was really nothing that felt too out of reach. So I was really impressed by the deck. I'm kind of out on a limb. I'm on a competitive team where all of my teammates are playing the kind of tier 1 heroes, and I'm over here on Dory. But I have a conviction about the deck. I think it is quite strong, and I think it does compete with tier 1 decks. But obviously there's maybe I'm in for a rude awakening when I go and cut my teeth at a large tournament like this. But I was really impressed with it. I think that most of my losses were my own fault, and yeah, like I said, I had a blast.
Okay, that's great to hear. I think Dory's like not tier 1, but I think she's like a solid upper tier 2, maybe even 1.5 that people are kind of sleeping on. So I'm happy that you have a lot of success with her.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'll take this moment just to thank you. You've been hanging out in our Discord, giving me all sorts of advice, and probably cringing at a lot of my off the beaten path takes on Dory. But
don't worry, I love these off the beaten path
yeah,
things. Like you said, like I'm only running Tunic, I don't like Courage. I'm like, what? That's crazy. But it's amazing. Different deck building. Like I even ran Blue Pummel before, and people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, no, you don't understand, it's so good. But, yeah, so I love it.
Well, I've learned a lot from you. It's been a blast interacting with you in the Discord, and I think we're going to continue to iterate on Dory together here moving forward. So
for sure, yeah, I can't wait for the next iteration. Speaking of which, so sounds like, are you going to stick with Dory for now? Like, is she going to be the hero you're going to try kind of like piling for a while?
Yeah, so I am going to cash in one of my PTIs for Worlds. There's a chance I might qualify in the top 50 after this weekend. 9-4 might be good enough to boost me into top 50. So we'll see. Regardless, I'll be playing in Worlds, and I'm very open to a lot of different decks right now. Worlds, it's a big enough tournament that I got to make sure that I'm making the right choice.
For sure.
And making the highest EV choice. And it might be Dory. It might be a Dory that looks like this. It might be a Dory that looks very different. And it also might be a completely different hero. So far, I'm very open. There's a little bit of ambiguity in my mind as to whether or not it's going to be a different CC format. I think that the new all mech set's going to be out by then.
Yep.
I have played a lot of Dash in the past, so that's also an option. Yeah. Played a lot of Dash. So yeah, open to a lot of heroes, but definitely gonna mess around with Dory a lot.
Well, sounds great. Well, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any special shout outs, or where can people find you or learn more about you?
Yeah, I mean, again, my special shout out is you for teaching me a lot of like the beginner stuff with Dory, and also being willing to have a lot of interesting conversations about the hero in our little channel. So thank you for that. And yeah, shout out to my team Ascent. Filled with a lot of awesome people. We had a lot of deep runs into the calling. Unfortunately, not any top 8s, but a lot of great performances. And yeah, I've just been really enjoying learning and growing alongside all those people. So shout out to everyone on there. Shout out to Nick Bova, who's our awesome team captain. Yeah, I guess that's it.
All right, well, sounds good. So I will post a public copy of this list in the description so people could check it out. And yeah, thanks so much for joining me. That was Easton Douglas with this awesome concept with this mid-range / almost like control-y Dory deck. I find it very fascinating. So thank you for sharing that, and hope everyone gets some new inspiration for like their Dory deck. But yeah, that's it for now. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.